Thank you very much. A few people in the audience I think will know me. I've been sort of looking at this stuff since about 2003. Came across Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project in that year. My background actually worked in software engineering and software development for about 20 years before branching out into education, and I currently work part-time for the Open University assessing disabled students. So you shouldn't believe anything that I say. You should check the evidence for yourself. I think you're going to find some of the information in this presentation quite challenging, and I don't really make any apologies for it, but what I will say is that it might come across in rather a sort of negative light, but we've got to consider the reason why these events are put on, and I'd very much like to thank Anthony and Rachel for the huge, huge effort they've put into these events and the huge, huge expense that they've had to bear in doing so. And with saying that, why are we here? Why do we come to these events? Well, I come to these events and I speak about these things and I do the research because I want to know the truth. Right? And the truth is very uncomfortable in many ways. And there's a saying, if people think that you make them think, they will like you. But if you really make them think, they'll hate you. All right? So I'm going to try and get through this and see where we get to. I may have to skip over a few things. I have got booklets and DVDs you've seen in the foyer there. We had a bit of trouble getting them set out. I've got supplementary information to support everything I'm talking about in here. And all of it's on my website as well, checktheevidence.com. So there's all my booklets, DVDs and so on. You'll know of my association with Dr. Judy Wood perhaps, and again thank you very much to Richard Hall, who's in the audience today, for his wonderful support, and getting this information to the public in Britain and Europe would not have been possible without his help. I've got a few copies of that book here, which have been specially shipped because we've run out of UK stock, and it's £25, but it's 500 pages. This is central to what I'm talking about, this book. Now, we're going to look at how important knowledge and research is covered up. That's what this presentation is about. We'll start off with a blatant example of how academia ignores problematic physical evidence despite claiming to be interested in it. We will then look at something I've spoken about a number of times, key aspects of what happened on 9/11. Because this is what's being covered up as catalogued by Dr. Judy Wood. Now, this is exopolitics, of course, but it ties directly into the centre of this subject, I would strongly argue, with the evidence that I've got. We will look at how the events that unfolded were caused by technology, and we will name that technology and what it is. We will briefly look at its possible relevance to the crop circle phenomenon if we've got time, because it ties directly into this. Due to the importance of the evidence I will be discussing, I will be clearly naming certain individuals because of what they said or because of what they have not said. This will not make me popular. I am faced with the problem of being unpopular in this happy family of researchers. My goal is to tell the truth as I know it, not believe it, know it. You could come to know it as well if you chose. I will then present data that shows that all too often a number of well-known researchers behave erratically when it comes to discussing already explained 9/11 phenomenon, which seem to have a direct relevance to their own fields of research. I will attempt to show that this activity goes beyond a lack of knowledge of the topic, it goes beyond ego, and it goes beyond a simple lack of awareness. I will conclude that these researchers are themselves, in some cases knowingly, participating in a cover-up. It's a cover-up that's directed at us lot, not at the general public, because the mainstream media handles them. That's why I've called this the taboo of disclosure. But we're going to start off with the Star Child skull, and Lloyd Pye is coming back to the UK this September with some new information about this skull. But this sort of theme that I've got in this video clip, which I'm going to show, it's about 6 minutes long, is sort of like what I'm talking about in our research community. I wanted to show this as an example of how the mainstream handles certain difficult topics. Whilst we can expect this sort of behaviour from the mainstream academics, I will also illustrate similar behavior by so-called open-minded alternative knowledge researchers. So in this clip, some statements about the DNA evidence, which is to do with what the Star Child skull is being discussed in this clip. It's about DNA evidence. That's out of date, because this clip is about 3 years old. But the principle of what I'm trying to show you is still valid. So I hope this sound comes all right.
How did you come into possession of the skull?
Well, a friend who got it from a friend who was the original owner of it gave it to me due to my expertise in neonatal nursing and anatomy. When I saw it and told them that this is totally out of this world, they were like, take it, don't bring it back.
If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one. I can't find one.
People have been seeing aliens for thousands of years, but there's never been a single piece of hard evidence. Now, it's possible the Star Child skull is just that.
We are here today with Lloyd Pye,
Who has worked as a military intelligence specialist. He has more than 30 years studying cryptozoology. He's the primary expert on the Star Child skull, having researched it for more than a decade.
Why all this interest in it?
I believe that it stands a very good chance of being the smoking gun that everybody is looking for, the holy grail of the field of UFO alien research.
Could you walk us through the main differences between the Star Child skull and a normal human skull?
The eye sockets of a normal human are about 2 inches. Star Child's not even 1. There are no sinuses in here, no upper sinuses at all. And you turn them around, you notice that the chewing muscles that come up through here and spread out to attach your jaw and chew cover quite a wide area here. With the Star Child, it's much reduced, so we have a much smaller, much reduced lower face. And there are fibers woven through the matrix of the bone, which were found under a scanning electron microscope.
does this skull have any fibers at all?
No skull of any kind of primate that we know of, or any really bone that we know of, has those kind of fibers. They seem to be unique to the Star Child. If you turn around and look on the inside, and you feel in here, you feel that ridging of bone that will hold the cerebellum in place. With the Star Child, because it has such expanded brain pressing down that way at such a steep angle, we should have a spreading of the foramen magnum, but we don't. So we have a very different kind of brain in this skull, whatever it is. Now, if you stick your finger in the foramen magnum hole to simulate a neck, right, you see how the human is there, so it would be like this, but the Star Child's actually balanced like this. So it's kind of like a misshapen golf ball on a tee. It's very different from the human neck in that it's half the size and it's centered up under the head.
When you see how the neck connects to the skull, that's a closure for me. It's not a deformity. It was built that way.
We've had the DNA of the human tested fully recovered, no problem, normal human being. But in 2003, we found that the DNA of the Star Child was very different. While we could recover its mitochondrial DNA, which comes from its mother, the nuclear DNA, which contains the DNA of its mother and its father, we could not recover that, which indicates that there's something very unusual, if not completely different, about the father.
To your knowledge, is there any reason why the nuclear DNA was not recoverable other than the fact that it's not a human father?
If the father had been human, all indications are it should have pulled up very easily with the primers that were used, but it didn't, so we can only conclude that there's something very unusual about the father.
I'm really excited to meet with David Aguilar because David Aguilar has written a number of books for National Geographic on what's going on out there in the solar system and what other life forms may look like.
We are talking to NASA, we're talking to the Origins of Life initiative here at Harvard. We're actively searching for life in the universe.
This really elevates our investigation to have a Harvard scientist weigh in and talk to us about the real possibilities of alien life coming into contact with Earth.
What shapes, what forms, what evolutionary pattern they might take. Boy, that's the big mystery today. But of course, things are going to evolve differently on another planet. And there's no reason that we would have humanoids. I mean, the chance of finding humanoids that look like us, like you see in Star Trek, are so unbelievably small. You're going to get intelligent creatures, but they may not look anything like we would even relate to an intelligence. There's no telling what could be possible, but since we don't have anything in our hands to look at and compare, I mean, I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it.
David, you just said that there's no evidence of extraterrestrial life right now. We think we may have something here.
Watch his face.
Wait a minute. Guys, what am I looking at?
This skull was found in a cave in northern Mexico. It was carbon dated to 900 years ago. Look at the eye sockets. Look at the shape of the head, and look at the neck.
I'm curious, any DNA samples from this?
The mitochondrial DNA is human. They did the nuclear DNA test and could not sequence the father's DNA from the nucleus of the cell.
Are you saying this was a cross with an alien or just a human with a terrible deformity?
That's one theory. It's a hybrid.
Prove it.
So the key bit was at the end there, and I'll just run through what he said. It's quite a long clip because I wanted to show you a bit of information about the Star Child skull, because it's very little discussed in the UFO community, even though it is solid physical evidence and it's getting stronger by the month. There's new information coming out about the Star Child skull. Stephen Greer apparently picked up the Star Child skull and said, "Oh, it's very interesting," put it down again. Stanton Friedman wouldn't even pick it up. In the clip there, David Aguilar, who's a researcher who claims to be interested in extraterrestrial life and the possibilities, he said in that clip, you may have missed it because it was very quick, "I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it." That's what he said when that sketch was on the screen in the background. They give him the Star Child skull. His face drops. He knows what he's looking at. Deep down, he knows what he's looking at. They suggest that it's an alien or an alien hybrid, and that DNA tests have been done on it. What did he say? He says, "Oh my God, give me it, I want to take it to my lab, come on, let's get it now, where is it, can I have it?" No, doesn't say that. He says, "Prove it, he says. Not interested. So in other words, he's pretending to be interested in the truth about alien life, and in reality is not interested, because he's had that opportunity put literally in his hand, and he says he wants to give it to somebody else to do the job, because he knows what it means. He knows it's suicide. He knows it's the undoing of his world, the collapse of his world, and everything in it. That's what's at stake. Yikes, I actually don't want to take this into the lab and everybody look at it, because I would be finished. Finished. That's what he means. So I've discussed what was in that clip. Now, we're going to go on to 9/11 and how this, because I've noticed over the years, I first came across Lloyd Pye's research in 2004. His research has been treated in a very similar fashion to Dr. Judy Wood's research. I could talk about this for hours. But we're going to talk about Dr. Judy Wood. She opened Pandora's box, everybody. She opened it. In approximately November 2006, Dr. Judy Wood started to become more well known in relation to the evidence that she posted on her website regarding the destruction of the World Trade Center complex. She had already been studying those events for about 5 years. She had already determined that some type of energy phenomenon must have been at work, because the evidence she catalogued could not be fully explained by any other mechanism. It wasn't bombs, it wasn't gravity collapse. She'd ruled out all of that, essentially, by the evidence she'd catalogued. Over the next 18 months, approximately, she completed further research, eventually determining that some aspects of how the towers were destroyed. And that's what the book's about, and it will show you in clear terms what that is. It is these aspects which many researchers either ignore, misquote, cannot understand, or muddle up with other things. And that's what my book is about, 9/11 Finding the Truth, which you can download for free. Okay. Now, central question in 9/11, which changes everything about it and everything you thought about the world, is embodied in these two pictures, really. Is this a building which is collapsing? Is it exploding? Is it falling down? It's turning to dust. That's what it's doing. And if you watch this clip carefully, I'll see if I can point it out. It's not very clear with this light, it's quite a grey image, but you can watch this on YouTube. There's lots of copies of it. You can actually see the pieces of steel turning to dust before they hit the ground. Before they hit the ground. And you can see it much more clearly in this piece. Now, certain researchers, which I've had to post another article about, claim that all the video footage on 9/11 is fake. All of it is fake. Richard Hall and I did a program about this. Some of you may have seen it. It wasn't specifically about the video being fake. We did a program about Richard's radar analysis, which kind of hooks into this at some level. Simon Shack claims that all the video footage is fake. He made a film series called September Clues. So he says that because all the video footage is fake, you can't make any assumptions about what it shows. But I said to Simon Shack, well, I actually went to New York in 2008, and I can verify that the World Trade Center towers are no longer there. I filmed them not being there. So I know they're not there. Richard and I actually made a discovery that we could film ourselves not being in two places at the same time. But being more serious, it's a dishonest statement. It's dishonest because not only does Dr. Judy Wood not rely solely on video evidence, she looks at a range of evidence, you can clearly see that the towers are no longer there. So you have to decide how they went away. That's a central question. How did those towers disappear? What mechanism, what technology? And that's the key thing. Technology was at work. And the point about my presentation is that the technology which made this happen should be of interest to every single person in the UFO community. Every single person should be looking at this. Because it has a history. And we can trace where it goes too. There's just a set of still images for that if you didn't get it. About 8 seconds. 70 stories of unsupported steel turns to dust. 80 to 90% of two of the world's tallest buildings, slight typo there unfortunately, disappeared in 20 seconds. Where is the rubble? This again is a key picture that Dr. Judy Wood opened Pandora's box with. This building here is building number 7, destroyed at 5:20 in the evening. We therefore know that this picture was taken before 5:20 in the evening. If you can see that, that's the rubble pile from two 1,400 foot high, 110-story buildings. So somebody apparently shipped all of that to China in 2 hours. That's what the truth movement will tell you. Oh, I'm interested in 9/11. Oh, that story about the buildings falling down, well, you know, it's just bogus, but they shipped all the steel off to China, Asia, or wherever. It's another cover-up. So, I've got a whole presentation about that, but we're going to go on to the technology. We're going to jump to the technology. This has been known about by Colonel John Alexander since at least 1983, because he visited the person who was doing experiments which produced that bar. The Hutchinson effect, an explanation by Mark A. Solis, which was written in 1999. First of all, the Hutchinson effect is a collection of phenomena which were discovered accidentally by John Hutchinson during attempts to study the longitudinal waves of Tesla back in 1979. The Hutchinson effect occurs as the result of radio wave interferences in a zone of spatial volume encompassed by high voltage sources, usually a Van de Graaff generator and 2 or more Tesla coils. The effects produced include levitation of heavy objects, fusion of dissimilar materials such as metal and wood, anomalous heating of metals without burning adjacent material, Spontaneous fracturing of metals, which separate by sliding sideways in a fashion. Temporary and permanent changes in crystalline structure and physical properties of metals. The levitation of heavy objects by the Hutchison effect is not the result of simple electrostatic or electromagnetic levitation. It's not like a maglev train, it's something else. That's what John Hutchison discovered in the 70s. And Colonel John Alexander, who you'll find on Coast to Coast talking about UFOs, went to see him in 1983 and spent 4 months with him. And according to John, he knows what the technology is. And John Alexander was involved with SRI, Stanford Research Institute. He's involved in the Psychic Spies program, head of the Non-Lethal Weapons program.
There were many things that were lifted. One of the most interesting aspects of it was they were not on metal. In other words, this wasn't a big magnet, because there were things that were non-ferrous that were being lifted and floating about. But he also got a variety of effects. There were items that were, had destructive consequences, literally evaporate. They have items that, for instance, milled bars that had been, engineered for specific tasks. The strength is done, and it would be exposed to the field, and one end of the bar would be as hard as it normally is, and the other end would be like butter. And he just couldn't explain that. There were items that twisted with multiple substances, from aluminum, wood, iron screws. I mean, it was just bizarre the way you'd have this range of effects. But again, when you said, okay, let's watch this and see what's happening, so you could try to put something together, it just never wanted to comply. And that was one of the reasons why I asked John the question about whether or not he was part of the system.
Well, that audio clip's not very clear in here with the echo, but that's John Alexander discussing what he saw John Hutchison doing. That was on American Anti-Gravity in 2004. I've got the clip on my website, or you can go to thehutchisoneffect.com and you'll see all those clips that you can listen to them. So John Alexander knows all about the Hutchison effect. Now, another of the effects, we'll come to the bent metal and things, but one of the strange effects that Dr. Judy Wood catalogued was these weird fires. You see here, a raging car fire, paper only a few inches away, not burning. A fireman walking past some fire, all this paper around it is not burning. This looks like fire, but it's not conventional fire. It may turn into conventional fire at some point, but when it starts off, it isn't. This is John Hutchison's experiment of trying to reproduce the Philadelphia experiment. And you'll see around the boat, if you haven't seen it already, bursts of flame just spontaneously happening. So that's one of the phenomena. Spontaneous fires. Bent beams. That's a copper bar, 3-inch diameter solid. It's not hollow after one of John's experiments. That's a beam from the World Trade Center. I'm going through this quite quickly. This is all in the book, and I've got booklets and all kinds of stuff. It's plain as day. Plain as day when you see it, when the comparison has been made. This is a police car, as you see, NYPD. Is it parked that way, do you think, on 9/11? Here's John Hutchison's reproduction of, from a challenge for Ace Baker from November 2008. He was challenged, a $100,000 bet, to reproduce his levitation effect with this wrench by a chap called Ace Baker, who I've written about in my book. John did the challenge. He reproduced the levitation. Of course, Ace Baker never showed up. And he's short, and John Hutchison's now short of $100,000. Surprise, surprise. I've got all the emails about that if anybody thinks that I'm making this up. We saw levitation effects. We saw the levitation of the wrench there. I've got a number of levitation accounts of witnesses. This is from Michael Mako. I realized I couldn't get out from under the collapse. I dove under the ESU truck that was facing north on the west side of West Street. I dove under that and waited for the building to come down. When the building did come down, I actually thought I was trapped, and the truck was blown off me, pushed off me, I guess. It was not there. At that point, I was just really shocked and didn't know what was going on at that point. I didn't know. I was really, really shocked. So hang on a minute. It dies under this ambulance. The building comes down, and the ambulance is gone. How did that happen? We've got recently discovered a stairwell B, the survivors in stairwell B. One of them describing coming down the stairs, and he's got one of these, heavy hard hats on, and he hears the building coming down, and his hat starts lifting off, and he grabs it on. Excuse me, why would his hat lift off? What's going on?
South Tower came down, I was across the street, and I picked up the camera just out of habit. And something in the back of my mind said, run, run, run. And never in 20 years of shooting in New York have I run from an assignment. But something in the back of my head just said, run. And as I hit the corner of Liberty Street, it was almost being picked up by a tornado, almost being picked up by a wave. It was like being picked up by the black cloud. That black cloud had substance. It was like night, but it had a solid feel to it. It was like gravel, hot gravel, and just picked me up and tossed me about a block. At one second I was running, and the next second I was airborne. And I lost my glasses, I lost my cell phone, I lost my pager, but managed to hold on to both cameras.
But it threw you for a block?
I was back down at Ground Zero last week and walked the area where I have a pretty good recollection of where I was and where I wound up. And it was just under a city block.
He's a New York Daily News photographer. He was levitated and carried a block. Now, we talked about, in that description of the Hutchinson effect, I read out about electrical phenomena. This is one of the secrets of 9/11 that no one will talk about, because once you start to discuss it, you open Pandora's box, and once you see it, there is no going back. No going back. Weather on 9/11. Hurricane Erin is closest to New York City at about 8 o'clock in the morning. I see quite a few familiar faces in this room, so there are a few people who know this, but I dare say there's probably a number of folk that have looked at the 9/11 stuff have never heard about that. The eye of the hurricane is shaped like a pentacle, a five-sided shape, which is very strange. Don't have an explanation for that. So here's the path. 1st of September starts off as classified as a hurricane. Then it moves and hits Bermuda on the 7th of September, does a bit of damage. 8 o'clock in the morning on 9/11, it's closest to New York City. September the 12th, makes a right-hand turn and goes off out towards Newfoundland. Well, that's obviously just a coincidence. Nobody should be talking about that one. It's only to do with weather control, after all. It's just a trivial thing. Now then, another graph that Dr. Judy generated from data from the Alaskan magnetometer readings. Got this peculiar thing. This is measuring the deflection of the Earth's magnetic field. You'll notice that at 8:46 it reaches some kind of minimum. It either went furthest north or furthest south. What happened at 8:46 on 9/11? Well, guess what? It's when the supposed first plane crash occurred. This is technology at work. So I haven't really gone into a lot of detail there. If you want that, you can either download my book for free, look at stuff on my website, buy Dr. Judy's book, it's a recommended one. But we're going to just take a brief. I wanted to play this clip last year. Now, William Pawlak talked about sequestered technologies, right? That's what I'm leaning towards, sequestered technologies. Technology we don't get to know about. And you hear of areas like Dugway Proving Grounds, Dulce, New Mexico, Pine Gap in Australia, Denver Airport, Area 51 and so on. Anti-gravity, free energy and advanced space travel technology all seem to have been developed. I'm convinced of that. But the thing that nobody will talk about is advanced weaponry. Everyone talks about UFOs and nukes, but they won't talk about what happened on 9/11. Now, William Pawlak's testimony, which was released in 2000 and 10, I think. Right, this is out of date, this slide. Let's see. See if this comes up. Are you going to play?
Did not give up trying to find out who these guys were and who they worked for, what their agendas were. He and I had had long talks now by the mid-'80s about what was really going on in government, who was controlling what concerns he had. Because he had come to the realization there were a lot of things going on that weren't right. And he had supposedly made some contacts to find out more of what was going on. And he had contacted our mutual friend at CIA, another long-term contractor, been involved since World War II, in the very founding of the CIA, who got in touch with me and said, Bob's got something hot, and when he's back in the country again on business, we're going to get a meeting. A few days later, Bob was on his way to work just after dropping the two boys off at a private high school, I believe, in Nairobi. He was on the way to the embassy. And he was broadsided at a stoplight at 60 miles an hour by a reinforced Land Rover. He was killed instantly. The Brit that supposedly was drunk at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, was taken to the hospital and immediately disappears. And all the evidence he had given in the way of documentation was proven to be phony as to who he was, and Bob was killed. And it was a hit. And it's always concerned me today that he had gotten a little too close to who had been involved with this implantable chip technology. We'd been trying to, for a couple of years then, quietly trying to find out who had been doing it without our government realizing it was going on. Because whoever it is has got total ability to penetrate anytime, anywhere, our government and locate what is going on instantly.
Who do you think they are?
Research since the early 80s on my own and with some friends indicates that we have at least 4 power groups in the world. They have wealth beyond all imagination. They have advanced technologies. They have taken over various programs, particularly black programs, within our government and probably even the Russian government and the Chinese. Their politics to them, as we know it, is not the same. And they have agendas totally unlike what our governments, we perceive our government's agendas really are. And that they are able to track unbelievably what's going on around them at a minute level. And who these people are, my friends and I have given them names, but they have no relevance to what they call themselves. We just simply call them the 4 horsemen. And that these horsemen work together at times and they work against each other at times. There's an ongoing battle between them at a low level to who's going to be top dog in the world. The one commonality to all 4 appears to be an absolute desire for control of everything and everything. And that some of them have different bases for this. From the point of view of it, each of them has their own philosophy. And that core root philosophy guides them supposedly in their actions. And we believe that this is what was causing a lot of strange things to happen in Nevada that we were experiencing, and in a strange way correlates also with what happened with these implantable chip technologies that I personally brought, now I look at it, to the wrong people in the government. Because we never got to use that technologies for what it was we really intended it to be used for.
What do you think, these 2 men who came to the meeting, what credentials did they show to get in? I mean, what did they have? Were they FBI or were they?
Above and beyond that, they were NSA, NRO, that sort of credentials. But we would later check and they didn't exist. They did not exist. Yet their credentials were spotless. Even to the point where if it was an access control requirement, the identification systems that they carried passed all the access control mechanism requirements we had, be it biometric, be it fingerprint, be it eyeball, be it anything, even to access code numbers. They knew it all. They had it all. And it was better quality than actually what the agencies had, which is most enlightening. It means unlimited budgets.
If you watch all of that testimony, which is very interesting, if you listen to William Paulick's testimony, he mentions SAIC several times, and I'll mention them again. But he mentions this shadowy, powerful group, right? And that shadowy, powerful group, which is given many names, reaches right into the heart of the alternative research community. Now, Science Applications International Corporation is mentioned by a number of Disclosure Project witnesses as significant benefactors of black budget programs. It's named as a party in Dr. Judy Wood's Ketam case, science fraud. I didn't explain that. When Dr. Judy Wood knew what happened to the towers, in other words, she knew it wasn't a belief, she built that into a court case with the help of attorney Jerry Leaphart. And she took that to the court case to the Southern District of New York. Nobody in the 9/11 Truth movement, or say nobody, hardly anyone wanted to talk about it. So SAIC are manufacturers of directed energy weapons systems or components. SAIC were in charge of ground zero security from 13/11/01, the day after 9/11. Another speciality of that company is, guess what? Psychological operations, folks. And this brings us to links between NIST and contractors that do directed energy weapons research and development. NIST, when they wrote the technical reports about how the World Trade Center was destroyed, which they received over $10 million, they used a number of contractors. And two of them were Science Applications International Corporation and Applied Research Associates, and also Boeing supplied data. They all do research in directed energy weapons. Just a coincidence, of course. They don't know anything. Now, just again a bit of background to this research before I come on to how it goes into the community here. Dr. Judy Wood actually, when she knew it was an energy weapon which had destroyed the towers, it was known, it wasn't a belief, it wasn't open to debate, it was something that was known, like we know that today is Saturday. We don't debate that, there's no point, because we know that it's Saturday, at least here in the UK. She wrote to Kirtland Air Force Base. Believe it or not, they have the Directed Energy Directorate of the Air Force at Kirtland Air Force Base. There is such a thing. You'll see postings on the internet saying directed energy weapons don't exist. Now, I forget his name, Rich Garcia, he wrote back to Dr. Judy Wood and said about her research when she sent him a sample, "You report phenomena that we cannot explain here, either because we don't have enough data or because the phenomena are not within our area of expertise." So this is the US Air Force talking about the destruction of the World Trade Center towers. He didn't say, "Oh no, that's all rubbish. It was Al-Qaeda did it. I don't know why you're writing to me." That's what he wrote back. Isn't that strange? So what you do is when you know something like this so important that's going to change the world, and it will change the world, and it is changing the world slowly, but you need to keep it covered up because this boils down to energy. Everything runs on energy. Whoever controls the energy supply controls the planet. That's what this is about. So you need to have a cover-up in place. Stephen E. Jones. He was this physicist. I've got another DVD featuring him. Stephen E. Jones was this physicist from Brigham Young University, and he came out with this story in 2005, just after the NIST reports came out, which said, "Oh, I think it was thermite that burned the towers down, melted through the girders and they fell down." I believed him, because he was a physicist from Brigham Young University. I believed him, and I joined his group, Scholars for 9/11 Truth. I've written all about it. I've got a video clip here because I became suspicious, but then he really blew it in 2007. Because in 2007 he did an interview at a 9/11 Truth event where they were talking about a new false flag operation taking place involving the nuclear bombing of a city in America. Right? And he was doing this interview with Bill Deagle, who's again, Bill Deagle's been on RBN and GCN and all these other networks, and he pops up talking about UFOs and New World Order and all this. And they said that a city was going to be nuked, possibly. And Deagle said it was going to be Seattle. And Steve Jones says, well, if that happens, we know there are 9/11 truthers nearby, so I hope they realise that just like we had a sample of dust from the World Trade Center, they'll go to the site which has been nuked, get a sample, send it to us, and then we'll be able to test it. Can you believe it? That's what he said. And people bought into it. I won't play the clip because I haven't got enough time. Now, Stephen E. Jones actually features in Dr. Eugene Mallard's book, and I'm jumping around a bit here, but Dr. Eugene Mallard's book is about cold fusion. It's called Fire from Ice. Okay?
Since Pons and Fleischmann were both well aware of the pitfalls of premature publicity, why would they bypass the accepted conventions of the peer review system and announce their discovery through the media?
I was thinking, these guys are no fools. They know what they're doing. These are good scientists.
Prior to the 1989 announcement, Stephen E. Jones, a physics professor at nearby Brigham Young University, learned of Pons and Fleischmann's work through an informant at the DOE. In a flagrant example of shameless opportunism, Jones insisted on going public quickly with his comparatively much less clear results. Disparaging the excess heat claims of Fleischmann and Pons, Jones' announcement would have effectively prevented the two scientists from patenting their process, a process they had developed on their own over long years of research. On the advice of university attorneys, Pons and Fleischmann, feeling their backs to the wall, reluctantly delivered their work to public scrutiny.
So in other words, Stephen E. Jones is connected to an energy phenomenon, cold fusion. In 1989, he essentially said, oh yes, cold fusion is real, but we're never going to be able to use it to get cheap energy out of. You can forget that. And he formed the committees and, talking groups and all this sort of thing. He did do cold fusion research, that much is true. He actually developed his own experiments which produced fusion phenomena. That is true. But that was done as part of the cover-up. In other words, he was aligned with the group that didn't want people to have free energy, didn't want us to have cars that run on no energy or, don't use fuel like they do now. He's part of the group that doesn't want that to come into being, whilst pretending that he isn't. This is a photograph he used in his presentation in 2006, talking about the destruction of the towers. On the left, we see the original photo, which actually is, again, not that clear in here, but you can actually see the steel standing in this cloud of dust. That was the photo he did. He did a contrast enhancement, and then he said, oh, I've got this on DVD. He said, oh, that's the thermite reaction there. Those little white specks, you probably can see those. That's what he was drawing your attention to. So he said, that's the thermite. Don't think about the rest of this turning to dust. That's how he did it. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Seems that people had heard something of the other than official story of 9/11. They've heard something to do with thermite and molten metal. You'll each know for yourselves whether this is true or not. I am often asked about this and why they have not mentioned Dr. Judy Wood's research or court case. In other words, you'll get people writing to us saying, oh, have you written to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth? They're doing a research into that. We get that every so often. This group was set up in approximately April 2007, around the time that Dr. Wood filed a request for correction and court action. AE 9/11 filed their own RFC, but they talked all about thermite in their public presentations, but in this legal document, the word thermite wasn't mentioned. Not once. Why would that be if they think it's convincing and proved? In recent times, it has been marginalising members who mentioned Dr. Judy Wood and the research discussed already here. An example of that is a chap who wrote to us, Scott Krajka. He joined Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth because he wanted to know the truth of 9/11. He mentioned Dr. Judy Wood's research and website, and he had remarks related to that research deleted from his biography. And when he saw that had happened, he said, well, delete my profile then. If you're going to censor what I put on my profile actively, then what's the point? This isn't a truth group, it's a cover-up. He didn't say that, those are my words. This is Richard Gage, who claims to be running a group which is interested in finding out the truth of 9/11 and asking for action to be done. Hang on. Oh, sorry, I will do, yes, thanks, Richard.
Now, with Judy Woods is not going to acknowledge any of that evidence and just hand wave it away, then she's not practicing science, she's practicing witchcraft. Go ahead.
So when he was confronted with that in a radio interview, Richard Gage, 9/11 Truther, who goes around the country, has set up this whole organisation which has collected about $800,000, I think. He describes that book in there as witchcraft, essentially. witchcraft, according to him. This is how bad it is, folks. This guy's sort of meant to be, quote-unquote, one of us. But he won't talk about what happened to the towers, or what really happened to the towers. Ian Neil and Tony Gosling. This is Ian Neil, who I counted as a friend. This is what he posted on a forum. Secondly, Judy Woods is a really bad public presenter of science. I've watched her DVD presentations, and I guarantee that a vast majority of her academic peers would agree with me that the way she presents her arguments in a lecture format is very poor indeed, and that's being kind. Now, that's a sort of an insult, but my point is not the insult. He says he can guarantee that her peers have a bad opinion of her. So if you think about that statement, that means he must have gone round, had a questionnaire, found out Judy Wood's associates from college, you know, said, I've got a little questionnaire, would you mind filling it in about her research, you know, 2 or 3 questions or something, and then he must have written all down those responses. I asked him for that information, that evidence, and of course he didn't have it. So that means that he was lying on a 9/11 Truth forum openly about Dr. Judy Wood's research. He was lying for truth. That's my point. The insult is another thing. And we've seen this going on since 2007. This is what my book's about. Same with Tony Gosling, who still runs this 9/11 forum. Judy Wood, directed energy weapons, aliens. Andrew is a good speaker. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate the stroke there. But he's too easy to ridicule, apparently. I'm easy to ridicule, according to Tony Gosling, who runs the 9/11 Truth Forum in the UK. On Simon Shack, who made September Clues. Somebody posted a link to Judy Wood's website on his forum quite recently, within the last 2 or 3 months. I'll stop here for now, Simon says. Please reply to this post of mine before you spam any other links to Judy Wood's blatant disinformation bullcrap on this forum. That's Simon Shack, who made the film September Clues, which some of you may have seen. That was a few months ago. I've written an article about that. Okay, crop circles and 9/11, very quickly. I've got, again, a bit more information on this. In the dust that Stephen E. Jones talked about, iron microspheres were discovered. And you can see his micrographs of those. That is apparently true. That is apparently true. But he said it was a result of thermite burning. What I think it is I think it's a fingerprint of the technology of the weapon. And I think that in a different mode, this is what's used to make some, I say some, not all, of the crop circles. There's one of the microspheres from the World Trade Center. This is from BLT Research's website, magnetised spheres, found in some crop circle soils. People have been levitated near crop circles. Pat Delgado was one. I've got his account here. I won't read it all out. Freddie Silver was one. Again, I've got an audio clip from him.
I've seen balls of light. I've been levitated off the ground in a crop circle, much to my amazement, which still baffles me to this day. I never would have exchanged...
How high up did you go? Just a few inches, or did you go way up there?
I have no idea to this day.
So we've got levitation, we've got residual effects. I think I've got that on the next slide, possibly. It's all right. I'll go on to the next one. Yeah. Residual effects. Across from the World Trade Center was Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank building. It was badly damaged, as you can see there in the picture on the left. It was repaired. July 06, they more or less repaired all the broken, sort of damaged floors. But guess what? 2006, they announced the building had got a mold infection, and they had to take it down piece by piece at a cost of $70 million. It's now gone. It took them about 4 years to dismantle it. And when we went there, they were still hosing down the road. Now, we don't know whether that's just to keep the mud off the road, or I think if you look what's there now, what's there? Water features are there. Same as at the Oklahoma OKC Memorial. That's a water feature as well. But in crop circles, we get these ghost formations. In other words, it seems that when these crop circles are made, the effects don't disappear immediately. They last until the next year. So you can see these formations growing through in the next year's crop. Now, let's get on to some of these other figures in the UFO community. Alfred Weber and Loren Murray. Loren Murray talks a lot about chemtrails. Alfred Weber talks about exopolitics. He's written a book about it. He still does radio shows every week, probably a couple of times a week. I used to think he was a good guy, and he wanted the truth. Lorraine Murray claims to be a geoscientist, but somebody sent me this document that said that she's a senior scientific technologist. This is from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, where she worked. Why am I mentioning her? She basically said, let's just see if I've got this in slightly the wrong order.
The matrix, the depopulation matrix, is designed to be activated by a 9/11 style false flag state terror attack against a major urban center in the U.S., possibly using nuclear, biological weapons, or advanced exotic weapons such as directed energy weapons, which I think Dr. Wood has done a magnificent job of, really holding her space and bringing us to this. Well, we've had the terror attack in New York through the false flag operation using most plausibly directed energy weapons of some sort. Okay? We've had the Hurricane Katrina false flag operation using most plausibly directed energy weapons, or HAARP, to teleguide the hurricane right into New Orleans. First of all, I'd like to congratulate again Dr. Judy Wood, because I think she's proved prima facie that 9/11 by itself tonight was a crime against humanity through the use of an advanced exotic weapon. Okay? I believe that Dr. Judy Wood and the evidence that she has presented here would be a worthy witness at an international citizens war crimes tribunal. So this is going forward. It seems to me that you now have documentation that you could put together in papers that would be published by accepted journals such as the IEEE. I mean, you're dealing with comparisons between laboratory effects and field effects. Is this a course of action that you think would be useful, or?
Perhaps it's only so many hours in the day.
I see. I see what you're saying.
But it is intriguing, and I've put into these physical observations and noticing similarities, and that's where things are now. But it is pretty intriguing.
Yeah, because now it seems to me that in this paper you've achieved a new threshold, and that is to have what we could almost call a laboratory control.
Proof of concept.
Yeah, proof of concept, and that brings in a whole new standard to present a whole new standard of expression to the various audiences. I mean, there are so many audiences for this material, ranging from a public audience, a judicial audience, a legislative audience, a research audience, and it's just that the mind literally starts, gee, when are you guys going to make your first TV documentary? Is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Wow.
To me, there's a lot of compelling similarities.
Yeah.
Enough so that it's pretty convincing that some amazing technology was used.
Yes.
Something did this to the buildings.
Right.
It's an amazing technology. We don't know who did it or what exactly it was, but let's study it because we could use this technology for good things.
Yes. Indeed. That's a very profound statement, because that statement, in fact, dovetails with the mission and the goals of a whole movement called the disclosure movement, which is that, and I think that John has touched on it, and that is that behind the sequestered projects of the black budget and other classified military intelligence projects, there are these advanced technologies which are being developed at taxpayer expense, which are for weapons applications, which could as easily be applied to new energy applications that would be to the benefit of the biosphere. This research, I think, underscores the need for disclosure. Whatever technology did this should be disclosed.
And just run through 5 minutes why you think HAARP was the instrument that caused the molecular dissociation and the controlled and the disappearance of the World Trade Center.
Well, it was really Judy Wood's presentation, which had the physical evidence and the photos, which are not available. They haven't been.
Well, without referring to Judy Wood, in your own words, why do you think HAARP caused it?
So that's a bit of a turnaround, isn't it? Mr. Alfred Weber. How very strange. Now, in let's say, August 2007, when he was at the conference, much like this one, with Dr. Judy Wood, he said she'd done a brilliant job proving that an energy weapon was used to destroy the World Trade Center. He interviewed her in February 2008 at his house with John Hutchison and said, whatever technology that did this should be disclosed. A few months later, he says, with Lorraine Murray, don't mention Judy Wood. Why was it HAARP that destroyed the World Trade Center? Didn't even mention the Hutchison effect at all in 3 hours of radio. Not one mention. So we know that the Hutchison effect is very relevant to the destruction of the World Trade Center. We don't know if it's exactly what caused it, but it is very relevant. And I have evidence in spades that that's true. So we can know this. This is something we can know. We don't know whether aliens are going to land at the Olympics. We don't know whether the aliens come from the Pleiades, from Orion, from Sirius, whatever. These are all interesting questions, but we don't know the answers to those things. Some individuals for themselves know this, but they can't really pass that knowledge directly on to other people. 9/11 and the destruction of the World Trade Center is different. We can know this, and I can pass that knowledge directly on to you, if you want to accept it, that is. So I'll turn this another clip. So just run through in 5 minutes why HAARP destroyed the World Trade Center, and don't mention Judy Wood. That's what Weber said. And then I've got an email, I won't read it all out. Weber wanted to sue me. I had this article discussing all that in detail, and Weber wrote to me and said, if you don't take that down, I'm going to sue you. But all I actually did was I didn't sort of say to him, you know, you're an evil person, or, you know, I just literally documented what he actually said, and I linked that video, I put the audio clips there, so you can actually hear him saying it. And I put that on my website, and I wrote it down. I cannot be sued for putting on a website what somebody has actually said. I didn't accuse him of being, working for SIC or anything like that. I don't have that evidence, so it would be ridiculous. Stephen Greer. I'm going to run out of time quickly. Near-death experience. There is no doubt the Disclosure Project was a remarkable effort and a compilation of evidence, etc. Is what drew me back into the real UFO subjects in 2003, as I said in the introduction. In 1997, during their time working on UFO matters, Stephen Greer, Sherry Adamiak, Congressman Stephen Schiff and Colin Andrews were all diagnosed with cancer. Adamiak and Schiff died, and Greer and Andrews were successfully treated. In his book, Disclosure, 500 pages long, released in 2001, the write-up and descriptions of some of the witnesses he interviewed mentioned SAIC a total of about 6 times. But he won't talk about 9/11. I've just got a very brief audio clip, Richard. No. Yeah, it's just actually, I'll go forward to this.
But I just have to say that is why we're wanting to be cautious, because it is so easy for humans. I mean, look what happened after 9/11. I mean, it is so easy for humans to take shreds of information and then go on a war footing or go on a conflict footing.
So he talked about 9/11, and he implied, and I didn't say it openly, but there's other information on his website that implies that he believes the Al-Qaeda myth. Right? That's what he implies. Now, anybody of his intelligence should be looking at Dr. Judy Wood's research and speaking about it, at least to some degree. Going back a few slides. Now, he set up free energy initiatives in 2001. SeizePower.com was created in September 2001. That was his website. It contained, for an example, an agreement for inventors to sign if they had a device they wanted to develop, a free energy device that would give you energy for nothing. That agreement was all on that website. You could download it, sign it, send it to him. He would send somebody to see you, and then he'd try and market your device and get it developed. Now, in May 2007, Stephen Greer came onto various shows and websites and said, "Oh, I'm launching this free energy initiative called Aero 2012. When I looked at these two websites, they were identical. Identical. So in 6 years, all he'd done was produced an identical website. There was no details of any experiments he'd done, any research he'd funded, whether it had been successful, whether it had failed. There was none of that on either of these two websites. Sure, there are a few papers about how we need free energy to get rid of oil and all this, and papers about Tesla and stuff like that. But there was nothing. In an article entitled Transformation of Risk, originally posted on the Disclosure Project website, Greer wrote, that's been moved off now, this overview explains how the current risks of environmental global warming, air pollution and public health challenges, energy resource scarcity and competition, global terrorism and current electric grid obsolescence and vulnerability are transformed by these out-of-the-box technologies. He doesn't want to talk about the weaponization of it, which we know is real. We now have the evidence. That evidence became available in 2006, which was before this. It was after this book was written, but still, he's had at least 4 years. But I do believe he knows something about this technology. A lot of people seem to think they know about it, because he makes this quote, unfortunately, right now, the worst elements of humanity currently possess these technologies. When people worry about these technologies being disclosed, I forget about it. The worst elements already have them. So he apparently already knows this. That's the interesting thing. Dennis McKenzie, former SAIC employee. SAIC is one of the crown jewels of the super-secret black project world and is connected to UFO technologies and covert funding. Again, I've got another audio clip. I'm not going to have time to play all these, though. On 13th of April 2012, Dr. Stephen Greer mentions SAIC when talking about his meeting with Senator Barry Goldwater. Greer was discussing the role of Admiral Bobby Ray Inman in UFO secrecy. Inman was on the board of directors of SAIC. These people know what happened on 9/11. They know. They do know. Or if they don't know, they know who knows. That's the key thing. But I'm not going to have time to play all these audio clips. Again. And Richard Hoagland, he did this whole presentation. Again, I've had to write a whole article about this. I've got these articles in booklets out there. That's why I wanted to get them out. Obviously Richard Hoagland spoke here last year. In April 2011, he gave a presentation in Amsterdam. He spoke for 1.5 hours about Dr. Judy Wood's research. Guess what? Never once did he contact Dr. Judy Wood beforehand. Not once. This picture that he used in his presentation, that actually came out of a booklet I made in about 2007, which he got off my website. He didn't contact me to discuss it. I don't mind that he used it. I mean, I've ripped off plenty of his stuff, for heaven's sake. But the point is that Richard Hoagland would have an interest in this technology. This is a revelation that's here, and it's all waiting for the right president to say, this is about what we're going to do. Who wants to get on board? This is the way we change the world. I mean, if you look at CNN, you look at NBC, you look at Fox, you look at the litany of awful bad news that we've been living with for almost 10 years now, since 2001. What was the biggest single reason why bin Laden ostensibly killed 3,000 Americans? So in 2008, I've got a recording, Richard Hoagland was talking about bin Laden having done 9/11. In 2011, he was doing a 1.5 hour presentation of Dr. Judy Wood's research. What made him make the switch? Richard Hoagland is not telling you the truth. Initially praising Dr. Wood, he states in his presentation, following the evidence to its extraordinary and totally illogical, Mr. Spock, illogical conclusion, he implies Dr. Wood has scientifically followed the evidence to the conclusions, yet he implies elsewhere that she is clueless as to what happened. This is in his Amsterdam presentation. He later states, so Judy's question, which is exquisitely logical, is, where did these things go? So far, she hasn't got an answer. That's what he told the public in Amsterdam in 2011. That is not true. She does have an answer, and the answer is in her book, which he apparently now has a copy of. But I'm hoping that some of the insights that we've been able to put together will help her investigation. Fine. He's never sent them to us, or to her. Never contacted us. And then he just switches and said, here is the mystery of the melted steel. Richard Hoagland was meant to be a science researcher. Steel didn't melt, turned to dust. It's another error. I catalogued a lot of these. You might think I'm nitpicking, but it's important. Because melted steel isn't a big deal. Steel turning to dust is. It's a signature of the technology. He also went on to disparage John Hutchison. And he said that John Hutchison, even though he doesn't have a clue what he's doing, well, John Hutchison really definitely does have a clue of what he's been doing, because he's been doing it since about 1979. He knows very much what he's doing. So again, he's backhanded disparaging John Hutchison. He said that he was kicked out of his flat. It wasn't true. That wasn't true. He left of his own accord. I've got audio clips of him saying that. I've got the transcript, but I won't have time to play all these. Now, I've never heard Richard Hoagland talk about Hurricane Erin on 9/11, and yet, in his blog in 2005, he talks about this. Actually, he talks about Hurricane Wilma, and this is one of the, you can see this, this is one of the traces from Hurricane Ophelia, and it appears that this has been modified somehow, because you're getting these these horizontal bands of rain patterns that the microwave system is picking up. He talked about that on his blog, on his website, yet he hasn't talked about Hurricane Erin on Coast to Coast. Richard Hoagland is not a qualified scientist, by the way. Dr. Judy Wood is. That's why she's so very dangerous. She has 3 degrees. Now then, we're out of time. I've got to go quickly. Nice group of folks there, eh? So as you see, I'm stood next to Mr. Richard Dolan, who spoke last year and the year before. In 2009 and last year. I met Richard Dolan in 2009. I met him briefly again last year. I put the evidence about Hurricane Erin in his hands and about the Hutchison effect. I put it in his hands in a booklet. Richard Dolan lives in New York State. In 2009, in September, in other words, about 2 months after I'd met him, 3 months, in a 77-minute podcast that he did to commemorate 9/11, he only referred to a peer-reviewed paper about nanothermite. Not once did he mention Dr. Judy Wood, not once did he mention John Hutchison, not once did he mention directed energy weapons, not once did he mention the court case against SAIC, the documents for which are in the court system, if you want to go and look for them. Didn't mention any of those things. He mentioned thermite being an explosive. That is the only thing he spoke of. Why, when the SAIC, the company SAIC, has been linked to the UFO cover-up, is Richard Dolan not connecting it to 9/11? Especially when he was one of the first UFO researchers to write about 9/11 in about 2005. And he's stated that as well. He's quite proud of that to some extent. And there's all the quotes. I could go through it, but we're getting short on time, so I think I'm nearly up to time now. We're supposed to 1:45, is it? Anthony, is Anthony here? Right. Okay. I'm going to have to skip through some of the rest of this. Richard Dolan's not a qualified scientist. He's a historian. Dr. Judy Wood is. There was another broadcast in which Richard Dolan mentioned that it was a particle beam weapon. You'll hear that said a lot. No, nothing to do with particle beams, nothing to do with Tesla beams necessarily. It's not space beams, it's not any of that. So Richard Dolan gets it wrong. Nick Pope, he's been getting in the press again. Yes, indeed. Described the Exopolitics conference last year as being organised by the militant wing of ufology. In the Sun newspaper, that's what he said. Now, this is on YouTube. If you Google for Anthony J. Hilder and Nick Pope, you will see Nick Pope backing the official story of 9/11 100%. 100%. No scepticism whatsoever.
Nick Pope, formerly with the Ministry of Defense in England. Nick, may we use this on film?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. One always asks the question, why are we at war, both Britain and the United States, against Afghanistan? Why?
We're not at war with Afghanistan. We are, however, at war with elements of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. On the basis that they are not only terrorists, but they are exporting that terrorism to the Western world, as we've seen on many occasions.
When do they export terrorism to the Western world?
Al-Qaeda has exported terrorism on numerous occasions, the USS Cole, the embassy bombs, 9/11, and all sorts of other attacks.
Wait, you say 9/11. 9/11, according to most people who have done thorough investigation, is an inside job.
No, it's not.
You say no.
I worked for government for 21 years. I know what governments do, I know what governments don't do. And, you know, I've looked at both sides of this. Mm-hmm. I've looked at the conspiracy theories. I've looked at the 9/11 Commission report.
Can you tell me how a building could come down with simply the burning of jet fuel, which Jet A fuel burns at about 700 degrees, to melt steel? It's going to take 2,200. How could that defies logic?
This is one of the popular.
How does it?
This is one of the popular misconceptions of 9/11. For the building to collapse, you don't need the steel support structures to melt, which, as you say, does happen at a higher temperature than aviation fuel burns. What you do need is for the steel to lose its structural integrity, and that happens at a much lower temperature. So the physics and the engineering is not in. Well, I've spoken to people who do controlled demolitions, and they've looked at some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and they've not been convinced.
They haven't been convinced. The United Nations.
I hope we can discuss these issues at more length in Phoenix. I think we will have to agree to disagree on a lot of this, but I have a plane to catch now, so going to go, but happy to pick up these issues in more detail soon.
Maybe you could explain to me how steel can dissolve with Jet A fuel, which burns at 700 degrees.
It didn't melt. It lost its structural integrity. That's why the building came down.
You know the FBI actually paid for the bomb that went in the 1993 blast.
Well,
Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman.
Well, I'm not sure that's actually correct.
Well, I'm going to give you a film so you can understand it.
If it's in a film, it must be true.
Well,
thank you.
Some people believe that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The key point is he backs up the official story of 9/11 to 100%, and he says he finds it offensive for people to question the official story of 9/11. Now, you might have seen this article in the Daily Mail. In fact, some kind person who was here at the last June event brought my attention to the particular statement which was in this article, which to me was very, very interesting. He said, Nick Pope said, Ministry of Defence has planned for the worst outcomes, attack and invasion. We should be prepared for even the most unseemly unfathomable. And he talks about, I think, space shuttles, lasers and directed energy weapons are all committed via the alien invasion wall plan to defend against any alien ships in orbit. That's what he said in the Daily Mail. That's what I don't know if the Daily Mail got that right. So he mentioned again, directed energy weapons is a key phrase. Not many people use that phrase because they don't know what it is. And Ian Crane as well. I've got a very brief clip here of Ian Crane, so thanks. I've got.
Now, it's the World Trade Center towers and the collapse of the towers that cause you to have to suspend your knowledge of Newtonian physics if you believe the official version of events. Building 7 was indeed a perfectly executed controlled demolition. The building came down in its own footprint and the pile of rubble was 12.5% the original height of the building, exactly as per the controlled demolition textbooks. Buildings 1 and 2, which are more than twice the height of Building 7, just to put it in perspective, Building 7 was roughly the height of the tower at Canary Wharf. Just to put it in perspective. The Buildings 1 and 2 collapsed into dust. The buildings totally disintegrated. There is no explanation as to what has caused that. It's a big question that's left open. Take a look at this for a second.
So he said that Building 7 was a perfect controlled demolition. But he said there's no explanation for the destruction of Towers 1 and 2. That's what he said at last September. Last September, approximately 8-9 months ago. There is no explanation for the destruction of Towers 1 and 2. No mention of Hurricane Erin. No mention of the court case which has the evidence which proves what happened to the buildings and suggests what the mechanism was and gives a proof of concept of that. He doesn't mention that, despite Ian Crane knowing me personally. Now, the way I will give Ian Crane credit is he has referred people to me to get Dr. Judy Wood's book. If he'd asked to, because Ian Crane has a web store and everything, if he'd asked me to take on some books for his web store for me to fulfill orders for him, he could have advertised on his website and had a kickback. Never even contacted me. So that brings me, right, I'm just going to overrun by probably a couple of minutes, but from my conclusions, and I've skipped around quite a bit, I've got lots of supporting information for this and a lot more. I haven't had time to fit in audio clips and so on. 9/11 is a central blind spot for almost all speakers and researchers involved in disclosure. Linking secret technology to the destruction of the World Trade Center is seemingly a no-no. And there is a comprehensive effort, example of which are documented in my book and some here, and a clear pattern has emerged. Do not mention 9/11 and the Hutchinson effect and Dr. Wood in the same sentence. Do not mention 9/11 and Hurricane Erin. Do not mention Science Applications International Corporation or Dr. Wood's court case, the Keatam case from 2007. However, when you're talking about 9/11, it is okay to mention thermite, thermate, nanothermite, HAARP, mini-nukes, fluoride, and you might think that's a joke, but it's not. I've not got time to go into that. Secret disclosures from unknown sources who claim to know things like Henry Deakin, remote-controlled planes, lasers from space, particle beams, etc., etc. In other words, you can mention anything but the truth. Okay? So if you're forced to talk about Dr. Judy Wood's research, if you're somebody like Stephen Greer, Alfred Weber, whoever, just characterize it as a theory. Because if you can characterize it as a theory, especially a conspiracy theory, it's one that can be safely disbelieved without there being any evidence. Say, well, it's plausible. It might be true. Well, I suppose it's plausible that it's Saturday today. It's plausible that my name's Andrew Johnson, isn't it? Well, I think it was a mixture of things that was used to destroy the towers. Don't actually talk about the evidence which shows you and shows you very clearly what it was. Don't talk about the relationship to cold fusion. That is a no-no. Don't mention Andrew Johnson's documentation as outlined in this presentation, but let's just be one big happy family of UFO researchers looking into this alien issue and so on. So it's vital to understand the connection between secret, weaponized, free energy technology and the events of 9/11, especially, but perhaps not exclusively, in the destruction of the World Trade Center. By that I mean there's some evidence that it was used at Oklahoma City as well. There is clear, proven link between cold fusion research and Stephen E. Jones and 9/11, and the link to the Hutchinson effect is a vital one. The 9/11 hurricane data revealed by Dr. Judy Wood also implicates the use of weather control in the days prior and following 9/11. Somebody has the ability to steer hurricanes. The climate change debate is irrelevant. It's a sideshow. It's a circus, like everything else. Large sections of the truth movement have been set up, controlled and directed. Apparently, there are some well-known and popular figures who seem especially not to be able to talk about energy and 9/11 and weather control without omitting the details or getting them wrong. In other words, sometimes they'll talk about these things, but they just get it wrong. They get it wrong. And it seems clear that in other branches of the truth movement, sophisticated operations of disinformation and perception management are still in full swing, and they are being successful. I would dare say there are a few people in the audience, even though most of this information has been available since 2008, who've never heard this before. Are you ready to reevaluate the evidence presented here and be more critical of those not talking about this? Or is it just me being belligerent, grumpy, egotistical, curmudgeonly, and being pedantic? You have to decide that. But please, if you're going to decide that, take a look at the evidence. Don't just sort of come out with some broad brush statement which you haven't checked into. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend.